episode of the Kazakh Libertarian podcast. Today I'm sitting down with the TechnoAgorist to talk about pacifism. And it's that kind of comes up. So, Ryan, how you doing?
Howdy. Thanks for having me on your show.
No problem. Thanks for coming on. So, pacifism. This was going to be paired with another episode I did on the necessity of violence, but that episode fell through and I haven't recorded it yet. So right now you get a head start of being the first up in the debate on violence versus pacifism. So where do you draw your pacifism from? Like where do you get this from? I assume it says yay God, so I assume it involves something religious.
Yeah, it comes from the Bible. As a follower of Jesus, I see Jesus as the ideal human. You know, that's what the Bible describes him as. You know, if we want to know what God is like, we're supposed to look at Jesus. Jesus is the express image of God. So that means the ideals that Jesus lived and that he taught should be our ideals, or our highest ideals as humans, despite our failings. So that's where I come from.
Jesus is the archetype we should all try to embody. You know, I mean, that's what he is. I have a lot of friends who are Christian pro-war people, like straight up say they're pro-war. And I'm like, how do you follow the Prince of Peace and claim pro-war? Like that just seems kind of contradictory to me. But I don't have any scriptures written down, but let's just kind of go into it. When you encounter a Christian who is a neocon and supports all these wars, or says the nuclear of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a good idea, yeah, I know, it exists, sadly. How do you approach the conversation when you talk to a pro-war Christian?
Most of the time I don't, because generally those people don't respond very well to a conversation. They're set, you know, because they have a family member who died in the military or whatever. It was drilled into them by their grandfather who was in World War II. And, you know, so for them to deny that, or for them to deny kind of warfare as a legitimate, you know, response or a legitimate means of solving human problems, if they remove that, then that makes, you know, their loved one's death or something, you know, worthless or just not right. So it's a really rough thing. So generally I don't directly approach people about that. But what I do is when I teach the Bible, I try and teach it as you know, correctly as possible, which leads to pacifism, in my opinion.
Let's get into it. A lot of Christians will point to the verse where Jesus, I think it was Jesus, that said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy a sword. And they interpret that as being pro-violence. I don't. I think the idea of only a deterrent is not necessarily connected to an act of violence. Well, actually, I want to ask, what is the pacifist view on owning firearms? Because I assume you wouldn't use them, but like, what is your view on like?
Well, a firearm's a tool, ultimately. It's a matter of what you use it for. I mean, if you're going to say that a firearm is only a tool for, you know, murdering humans, are we saying that the knives are only tools for? I mean, they can be used for murdering humans, but is that? I mean, that's just a bad argument in general.
Yeah.
Like, I have nothing against owning guns whatsoever. I mean, I live out in the Ocala National Forest. There's bears and all sorts of things, coyotes, and, you know, everyone out here is armed. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you want to solve human problems, you know, interpersonal problems with violence.
I think it's gonna be hard for me to have a lot of pushback because I am very much. I wouldn't say I'm a pacifist, but I have a very hard time having any disagreements because you guys are consistent, and it's very hard to argue with someone who is consistent. So, what scriptures would you say point to pacifism, or what parts of the Bible point to why we should be pacifists? Like, what's the favorite example? What's an obscure example?
Okay. Well, this is a good way to approach it rather than starting right with, you know, Luke 22, because so many people, they skip the rest of the teaching of Jesus, jump right to Luke 22 and say, there's this one verse in the entire gospel, in all the gospels, where Jesus says to buy a sword. Therefore, Jesus is pro-violence. It's like, you know, one of the number one rules of interpreting the Bible, okay, is you interpret the less clear in light of the more clear. you know, as in if something is said clearly many times and then you come across an exception, you don't base your theology, you don't base your doctrines off the exception. What you do is you interpret that exception in light of the more clear, the more widespread, you know, teaching. So what Jesus taught was that we don't solve our problems with violence. Like Jesus said, if someone in, you know, Luke, you know, if someone takes your cloak, don't even ask for it back. Love your enemies, do good to them, pray for them. So tell me, if you're loving your enemy, how can you love them while you're killing them? Or doing good to your enemy, how is it doing good to them if you're killing them? I mean, you could make the case that I'm doing good for a hypothetical next victim by stopping them, okay? But that's separate. That's a separate issue. That doesn't have anything to do with the person you just killed, because you said what's good for them. You know, you want, so if you're following Jesus, you want good for your enemy, okay, or the person, presumably the person who's harming you. And if someone takes your stuff, don't even bother asking for it back. Like, that's pretty intense. It's like you're not supposed to ask for him to give your stuff back. You just jump to shooting them. Is that, do you think that's what Jesus meant there? You know?
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense. So then, I mean, you could skip all the way ahead then to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then here comes the guards to capture Jesus. Now, Jesus is the most perfect human being in the history of the world. Nobody comes close, okay? Obviously, because Jesus was literally perfect. So you have the most perfect human in the history of the world, and you have these people violently coming at him, swords, you know, spears, like violently coming at him to kidnap him, to arrest him. So they are clearly in the wrong, and Jesus is clearly in the right. He's done nothing wrong. So if there's ever been a time in history that violence is legitimate, that is the point. That was the most legitimate in all of human history moment to use violence. And Peter
being persecuted. I mean, Jesus being persecuted not just for being how I put it, it's like someone's persecuted for doing bad. That's one thing. But he was persecuted for being good. You know, like he was the perfect person. He was being persecuted for his perfection. You know, it's like that is the absolute pinnacle of justification to defend yourself from attacks, and he did it. That's a good point. I want to write that down, actually.
And Peter knew this. Okay, Peter understood this. Peter went, "Holy crap!" If he probably, I imagine that Peter thought back to the Old Testament, you know, where you had, you know, like Jonathan and his servant heading out, or any of these guys in the Old Testament, you know, when the Spirit of the Lord came upon them and they slew like 100 people at once. I can imagine Peter. Yeah, exactly. Peter at this moment, he sees these guys coming. This is the Lord of all creation, who's the King of the Jews. He's like, well, you know, here we go. Now's my time. So he pulls out his sword, and I imagine he's thinking Matrix things, like I'm going to swoosh and they're going to, and he swings his sword, knocks off the dude's ear, and Jesus goes, stop. Which, that's wild. And Peter, you can imagine wait, what? He goes, put down your sword, Peter. Which, that's crazy, because here we are, the most justified moment for violence in history. And Jesus says, put down your sword, Peter. And does Jesus then say, I really have to be arrested, you see. I need to be arrested so that I can die on the cross. No, that's not what he says. He says, put down your sword, Peter. Don't you realize that those who live by the sword die by the sword? So Jesus could have made a specific point and said, my specific journey, what I need to do, I need you to put down your sword.
It is part of my Father's plan that I go with them. He could have easily made that argument. He
could have said, this time is not a good one. This time is an exception. It's special because I have something I need to do. But instead, he makes a general point. Okay. In the most justified moment of violence on the earth, Jesus says, reminds Peter, those who live by the sword die by the sword. In other words, saying that is not an appropriate action for you, even in this situation, even in any situation. A general statement, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Now, that is a general truth, because you find it in the world. Violence begets violence. That's just the way it works. You know, you have drugs and you decide you want to stop them. So you send armed thugs out onto the streets with badges to stop everyone from doing their drugs. Well, guess what? That violence causes violence in return, which causes violence in return, which violence in return. That's
blowback theory.
That's
the
way the world works.
Hmm?
Yes. Those who live by the sword do die by the sword. Violence creates more violence. It doesn't fix anything.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, Israel, like we have the whole Old Testament to remind us of this. Like, look at Israel. They were God's chosen people. God gave them this law and everything, you know. And this law had very strict, very strict punishments and things for doing specific wrong things. You know, you could be killed for doing this, and you could have this for this, and this for this. It was, very intense.
Mm-hmm.
God was teaching them over the course of the Old Testament that violence doesn't solve their problems. Because in all these years of Israel having this incredibly strict law, in all these years of killing blasphemers and doing all this other stuff, of David slaughtering all these Philistines and like in all that violence of the Old Testament, tell me, did it make Israel safer? Did it make Israel happier? Did it make Israel freer? Did it lead to any of the ends that they wanted? Like they had a chance to see the kingdom of God with violence. Can we build that perfect kingdom that everybody wants with violence? And it's a definitive no, because it's just a bloodbath. It's disgusting. And I'm convinced that once humanity hit that moment where God said, okay, it's clear. They've had enough time to learn that violence is not going to solve their problems. Once they hit that point, that's when God said, all right, let's do this. And Jesus came to the earth. So yeah, but those are two of the easiest ones, is where you just point out, Jesus, especially in Luke, where he says, don't even ask for your, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and don't even ask for something back if someone steals it from you. That automatically precludes killing them, both of those. But same with Jesus in the garden. Then you can also look at other things Jesus said. I mean, obviously you see him saying the same remarks different times in Matthew and Mark, in John. This isn't anything like Jesus was very consistent throughout his ministry that violence is not the answer. In fact, he contrasted himself with the powers of the world, where he said it's the kings of the Lord, or the kings of the world lord it over them, as in they lord over people and force their will down on you. Meanwhile, he says, well, my kingdom's different because his kingdom is the upside down kingdom, the bottom up kingdom, as opposed to bringing down, forcing everyone from the top. But yep.
I mean, you covered a lot right there, and it's like I had several questions, and you kind of went through them all in that one, in that little sermon with respect. That's when you have a good guest. When I have like 8 questions and out that lead into each other, and the guest leads into them naturally. That's a sign of like a good guest. I would be remiss.
So do we want to talk about Luke 22 now?
I actually don't know what's Luke 20. I left my Bible in my truck for going to church this morning. I don't know what's Luke 22.
Well, that's what you brought up. First of all,
okay.
Said, yeah. But he who has money, let him take it. Likewise, a knapsack, and let him who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one.
That's not. I mean, that's not an encouragement to use a sword. That's just encouragement to own one. I'm sorry.
What was that?
It's not an encouragement to use a sword. It just seems like an encouragement to own something. I guess it seems to be a.
Well, yeah, Jesus had sent all of his disciples out. All right, they get back, and he says, "Hey, I sent you out without money, everything." They said nothing, but man, it's been a long time since I've spoken about this. Either way, one of the most telling thing here is when you get to verse 38. They said, "Look, Lord, here are 2 swords." They say, "Don't look, Lord, we have 2 swords." And Jesus says, "Oh, that's enough." That's one of the things that always makes me chuckle about this, just in the sense that Jesus says, okay, he who has a sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Jesus was saying, yeah, we need swords. And then they say, here's 2 swords. And Jesus says, that's enough. Okay, are 2 swords enough to defend the hundreds of people who follow Jesus, because Jesus is followed by these huge crowds, and he's saying that 2 swords are enough to, protect them. If Jesus was planning an armed insurrection, or if he was planning some sort of defensive move that he wanted people to buy swords from, 2 obviously wouldn't be enough. That doesn't even make sense. But what happens immediately afterwards? He goes into the garden to pray. And what happens when he goes into the garden to pray the day before his execution? Peter pulls out a sword and knocks the dude's ear off. Jesus wanted to make a point about violence. So he made sure that they brought a sword to the fight, because he wanted to make that point once and for all, that yes, even now, put down your sword. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Like, that's not how we solve our problems. It wasn't how they solved their problems when they went town to town and they were kicked out. It isn't how they solved their problems in the garden. In Jesus's ministry, it's better to give your life for your enemy than to violently take your enemy's life, even if it's justified. So yeah, you can't point here to this one verse where Jesus mentions buying a sword. Moments before, Jesus uses the same sword they just referenced as an object lesson against violence in order to justify violence as a whole.
This has been the best sermon I've heard in a long time. I am absolutely loving this. Like, I love when someone can take a point in the Bible that someone would say, well, this means this, and they can say, well, actually, this led into this, and you walk this back, and it all equals. I absolutely love when someone can take a point in the Bible and do that, and I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for that, because that was absolutely incredible. Another one that a lot of people bring up is, well, Jesus flipped the tables on the Pharisees, therefore we can attack people. I'm sure you've heard that before as well, because these are very common. They're so common. I figured, like, they're so common. I'm sure you have a good response to someone being like, well, Jesus flipped tables and was violent, so can't we also be violent to people? What would be your response to that?
Well, my response there is, what if somebody came into your home, okay, uninvited, and they started setting up their tables or whatever to cheat and hurt your children, or who knows what their evil thing is? Just imagine something you wouldn't want somebody doing in your house with your kids, and they come in and they start setting up their stuff inside your home. Is it not, or is it? I don't see anything. It has nothing to do with pacifism or not. When you go and you say, excuse me, hey, no, you can't do that in here. Get out right now. Leave here and take your stuff with you. You grab it and you throw it out the door. Like, that has nothing to do with, like, that's not violence, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah,
I don't see how that. There is no way that, in my opinion, that would have anything to do with it. The violence Jesus talks about and the violence Jesus tells his people to not do is to hurt other people. But there's a huge difference when you say, hey, excuse me, no, this does not belong in my house. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to sit there, and, oh, well, because I love Jesus, I'm going to watch them, cheat and hurt my family. Of course not. It's like, no, get out. What's wrong with you?
He asserted property rights.
Okay.
He asserted his property rights to get them out of his own property. That's completely.
He said, consistent. This is my father's house. You have turned my father's house into a den of thieves. My father's house. He's taking ownership. He's saying, yeah, this is a house of worship, and you're screwing over my people, my children, my family. He's like, get out. He throws the tables. He lets the animals out. He gets his whip and swings and smashes their stuff, causes a big ruckus. And yeah, but it was his house. They weren't supposed to be there. So I don't see any problem with that. I don't see it as anti, just because that's exactly what I would do. It doesn't, I don't have to kill somebody. There's nothing wrong with throwing, someone's stuff out. It's like, no, excuse me. No, that's not happening here.
Well, I think I got out some of the basic objections. Let's time to get into more of the fun ones. What is
the outlandish ones that will never happen?
Absolutely. Well, not the. I'm talking more about rights. So,
okay.
we believe in negative rights. We believe in inalienable rights, I assume, because you're a libertarian type guy. Do you? The point has been made recently to me that I've kind of accepted is that our rights are not our rights are inherent, but they're not inalienable. Our rights are contingent upon respect for our rights from others or means of enforcing our own rights. That if I could scream into the void, I have a right to own this property, or I have a right to not be robbed. But if the majority of my neighbors around me don't agree, I am powerless to prevent it. I'm just screaming into the void. Now, my rights are contingent upon means of enforcement or means of respect.
If you can't assert your ownership, then yes.
Yes.
It doesn't count for anything.
And so, as a pacifist, I assume you say if you're a pacifist, I assume you're against putting gun and say I own this now, it's mine, even if it's right for ownership. So are you more in the camp that your rights are contingent upon your neighbors willing to defend and accept your own rights, and therefore you have to be my light just went out. Give me a moment. I like this blue, I think. Give me. Oh, God,
that's no good.
Don't
tell me you're recording from Louisiana.
Okay, we're gonna switch to the main light. It doesn't cast a bit of a shadow, but that light just blew on me.
Maybe I will end up looking better than you.
Technical difficulties. The same thing happened in the last podcast. I thought I fixed it. Anyway, so yeah, like if you're a pacifist, I assume you're against pulling guns and asserting your rights by force and violence. And so how do you go about defending your rights when they're under threat?
I'd have to take that in the moment. I mean, I've not been in that situation yet, so I don't know how exactly I would respond. I don't know what the different, social circumstances would be surrounding that type of situation or not. If you're talking about a pure ANCAP type circumstance, the question would be like your property, for example. It makes sense that you would buy insurance on your property, and it's in the insurance company's interest to protect their investment in your property. Okay. So there is the idea that there could be people who would be willing to turn somebody away if they're walking onto my property. Somebody I could even call and say, hey, this person's on my property. This person is, because in that case, they're then hurting the value of the property that's insured by the insurance company. And without the state in the place to put, violent police officers on the job, it would then go down to the next person in line would be the insurance companies, because they would either have to provide some means of enforcement of their own in order to protect their investments, or they would have to make sure that you, the homeowner or the landowner or the property owner in general, have some means of somebody who can turn away, those people who would, enter your property. Chances are in an ANCAP type situation, every individual wouldn't be physically sitting at their house with a gun, trying to stop people from messing with their stuff. That isn't rational. Okay, that's just not the way that things work. Yeah, that would, without the state providing arbitrary enforcement via the police, there would be other things. So I imagine in that case, I would have my home insured. I would have my car insured, and I would call the insurance company if somebody's, taking my car or something. I say, hey, somebody's driving off with my car, or somebody's here trying to set my house on fire, Now, in that case, chances are they would come and deal with it. But the thing is, in that situation, we always think in terms of the state, and the state only exists in terms of violence. For example, the only tool in a cop's belt is violence, is killing people. But an insurance company, it's not in their interest to just kill people. Okay. Yeah. As in there'd be a lot of market forces at play, because you can imagine that person has life insurance. And if that person's life insurance company would not be happy if you then cost them $100,000 for nothing. So these companies would have to have some sort of arrangement between them. So it would be in that guy's or that person's, it would be in the property investment protection group's, interest to work with this person and make sure that all their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted, so everything's worked out, before they have to deal with the legal issues of then justifying the expense to the insurance company. So, I mean, we can only speak hypothetically about this, but in that case, there would be a lot of market forces that would be pushing to not just show up and shoot somebody. Okay. They would, I mean, unlike the cops where you call them and they're going to show up and shoot, they'll first shoot your dog, and then they'll probably pull a gun on you, maybe shoot someone in your family.
And probably fast bang a baby just for good measure.
Yeah, of course. Exactly. And then if you're lucky, maybe they'll stop the robber, but chances are they'll get there 15 minutes late anyway. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But, you can only speak hypothetically. And I don't see myself as having any problem with, like, if that's the situation, if that's the world we live in, of course I'm going to insure my property. Of course I'm going to insure my life. Like, it's just life, but that doesn't have to be violence. And that type of system, the pressure would be to not use violence, okay, unless absolutely necessary. Now, in that case, that's where the gray area comes in, like, what if that property, enforcement agent, whatever, showed up and they did kill that person? That's something I would have to deal with between me and God, and, but I really don't know how I would respond to that situation, because I really don't know. Who knows? Maybe there would even be,
I really hate
non-killing enforcement agencies, the Christian enforcement agency, the non-lethal one. Who knows? Maybe. That'd be a cool market.
I really do hate throwing out these like hypotheticals, because like no one has an answer, because no one's been in that kind of situation, and so I feel like,
you can only imagine.
Yeah, I don't like throwing them out, but like so many people who are against pacifism throw these out. I feel like if I don't bring up some absurd kind of question, people go like, well, you don't really push back on them enough. I don't want to get the Dave Rubin treatment. I want to actually be told, okay, you push back enough.
Well, you still haven't asked me, what if a robber breaks in the middle of the night and they start systematically murdering and raping every person in your family? And
but that's so obvious.
Are you going to stand in the corner and watch them do it all the way till it's like, oh, shut up.
It's
like,
the most common thing to bring up. I'm tired of hearing that one.
I
didn't bring it up because I'm tired of hearing it.
Yeah. First of all, it's not going to happen. And second of all, you're not going to hurt my family. You're not going to kill them. You're not going to rape them. Not going to do any of that stuff until I'm dead. Like, I'm not going to be the one to kill you, but I'm also not going to stand in the corner and watch it happen.
Yeah.
No, you will have to physically, literally go through me. I will have to be dead on the floor before you touch anyone in my family. So, and that's not opposed to pacifism. That's just like, no, seriously, I'm standing here and you are not getting to my family. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not here to fight you. But yeah, in Jesus' name, leave us alone, man.
This is what I've always wondered. I get mixed answers on this sometimes. Let me ask you: is pacifism the rejection of violence, or is pacifism the rejection of killing? Because you get some people say, like, I just threw him in the leg, and it's like, that seems pretty violent for a pacifist, but it's also not a permanent killing. So it's like, is pacifism a reason to violence or a reason to killing?
I don't know. A lot of that is between you and God, because that is violence. And you could just like the old Andy Griffith episode where they hear that this guy is coming to town who's been in prison for many years. And Andy Taylor, the sheriff, he'd shot him in the knee. And that was all those years ago when he arrested him. So now years later, this guy still has a limp and he's coming into town and Andy's freaking out like, holy crap, is this guy coming to kill me? Violence begets violence. He shot that dude in the knee. The dude has a limp. He's been in jail for 10 years or whatever. Now he's free. And there's that question. Oh, okay. He's headed toward my tent. Is he here to kill me? even in a fun family sitcom, like, you still can't sidestep that reality that violence begets violence. So, yes, in my opinion, yes, shooting somebody or stabbing them non-lethally would still be violence. Like, I don't see that as being a legitimate, as a Christian, at least not an ideal way to deal with a situation, but obviously killing in particular is the one that's off the table. It's just like, no, that's not my place, so I'm not going to be the person to kill him. I mean, then you ask, well, would you physically hold somebody back if they're going to hurt some of your family? I probably would. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, whoa, no. What's wrong with you? No, we're not doing this, you know? And I'd probably also be praying in Jesus' name in their ear, saying, hey, buddy, be blessed in Jesus' name. You know, Jesus doesn't want you to do this, man. Come on, in Jesus' name, put the gun down. Let's do this. Let's work this out, you know? And, you know, once again, they'd have to kill me, but I'm not going to shoot them. I'm not going to stab them, but come what may. Though in that situation, I can't guarantee exactly what I'll do. Once again, there is that gray area. But what I can hope and pray is that I will be grounded enough in God's word and be listening clearly enough to God's Holy Spirit in me that when that situation comes, I'll be able to hear from him what is right in that moment and respond accordingly, as opposed to just go and create nuts or something. But even then I can't, that's hypothetical still. So I can't even say exactly what I would do, but I can say what the Christian ideal is, which is putting down your sword and is solving problems outside of violence.
Another question I have is, does being a pacifist ruin most forms of media? Because everything is all around violence. Like, can you still sit down and enjoy a good action flick, or you just kind of like, it's just a dog zone, Rick, stop stabbing all those people? Can you still enjoy the movie? Or
it really did change dramatically the way that I enjoy movies and the kind of movies that I enjoy. It didn't stop me from watching all violent movies, but it did very much affect how I watched violent movies, I guess you could say, you know. And it also affected, you know, it did affect to a certain extent what I'd watch, but and also my enjoyment of said movies, you know. Like, I'll still watch a war movie on occasion, you know, if it has something worth talking about, you know, if there's actually a story worth telling in it, and if there's something in humanity. Like, that's the cool thing about art, is that no matter what topic you're talking about, whether it's like the sweetest, cutest topic over here or the most depraved, awful topic over here, like, good art, like, humanity is able to burst through. There's like this. That's just a cool thing about the way God made us, you know. He told Adam and Eve, you know, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. In other words, make stuff, do stuff, fill the earth take your imagination and make it so on the earth, just like I made my imagination, you know, to create the earth and you. So art is our imagination, like, coming out. So you see so much humanity in that, and that's really cool. But when you have something like, for example, I know so many guys who love like the John Wick movies, you know, I cannot enjoy those. There's no redeeming quality. There's no redeeming value. There's no story to tell. There's nothing I can grab onto at the end and be like, you know, take something away from it, something meaningful. The only point that I can find in those is to just cheer that bad guys are dying. Okay.
For me, it's the stunt walk. Like, it's he did all his own stunts and walks in behind the scenes. It's like, okay, he actually trained pre-gun shooting for it. Like, even if you don't, like, for me, I'm more and more looking at Pacifism every day. I have a hard time being like, okay, yeah, those guys who killed his dog need to get it, but like, that was one dude. You killed 80 people along the way. I have a problem with that. You know, I don't believe in collective guilt. But the stunt walk that went into
notice things like that.
Yeah, it's like
when you start thinking.
Yeah, it's I'd say the more and more I think about pacifism, the more and more I have a harder time not saying I'm a pacifist. Like, it's hard. I think it's so I love being consistent. There's nothing I love more than being consistent. I'll lay in bed and I try to figure out inconsistencies in my beliefs to figure out where's the inconsistency so I can fix it. And pacifism is one of the more consistent things. And leads to my next question. What came first? Because you are Christian, you're pacifist, and you are a libertarian and cap. So, like, what did they all lead into each other, or they all kind of separate, they converse? Like, what was the story from, like, were you Christian, libertarian, pacifist, or did pacifism lead to libertarianism? Like, what was the story here?
I came from the right-wing George W. Bush
conservative over. I gotta
Republican thing. Yeah, that's that's what I was raised in. Go America, go military, go this, go that, and then yeah, you hit on 9/11. It's like, we're gonna take it to those terrorists, we're gonna destroy them. And then I was, I got married, we had our first kid, and we're living, and I'm kind of learning and growing, whatever. It was in 2008. In 2008, I actually voted for John McCain, and I went into the polling place. I, pulled the lever, I voted for him, or whatever, however we voted then. And then as I was walking out of there, my spirit, man, just went boom, or my conscience inside of me just went, and I jumped, like, I feel like I physically jumped. I just went, holy crap, what is wrong with me that I am so, there has to be something wrong with me that I could justify putting a vote down for this person. Something's broken inside of me. Something's not connected, because no, I don't want Barack Obama president, but I gave my vote, my approval, my, you don't have a vote against, you only have a vote for. So when you vote, you're putting your weight behind somebody, okay? Which means when they get elected, if they get elected, you're partly responsible for that. Like, that's heavy. And I put my weight on this man, and I went, whoa, this is, oh, that doesn't feel good at all. And it was just like a real wake-up call that something's not right. I'm going with some flow that I'm not. It's like something is, I'm listening to somebody I shouldn't, or something's going haywire that this isn't right. So I took like a couple years off. I didn't vote, and I didn't, I just dove into books, man. I started reading, it was actually, well, yeah, this combination. Glenn Beck had had this one guy on, and then I was enjoying Glenn Beck at that time, oddly enough. And then so I followed this guy, and I saw that he was interviewed on Alex Jones' show InfoWars, and I was like, oh, well, who's that guy? So then I listened there, and I saw, when I went to the InfoWars site, I saw that Ron Paul was interviewed, and I was like, wait, Ron Paul, he was that dude who was running against John McCain and Mike Huckabee and them. And wait, why is he being interviewed? Isn't this guy, this Alex Jones, supposed to be a crazy person? So I was like, this is interesting. So I listened to the interview with Ron Paul and said, this actually makes sense. Rush Limbaugh during that election had said, whatever you do not listen to anything that little man has to say. So I listened to him. I was that stupid. I listened to him, and I didn't listen to anything that he had to say. But when I heard that interview on InfoWars, I went, this guy actually has something worth saying. So I ordered a bunch of his books, and I started reading through what Ron Paul said, and I'm like, this is incredible. It was just, my spirit was cheering, like on the inside, like, this is right. Like, not just good politics. This is good humanity. This is right. And then I saw his book, Gold, Peace, and Prosperity. The foreword is written by some guy named Murray Rothbard. So I thought, whatever, I'll order some of his books. So I ordered a couple of, actually I searched for them on the internet and found Mises, and they're free downloads. So I downloaded all of Rothbard's books, PDFs, as well as the very well done audiobooks that they have.
Oh, yeah.
Also for free. And I started reading and or listening to all of Rothbard's books, and I got sucked in.
Yeah, and he has a habit of doing that. Like, you read an anime to state, and you're just like, well, I now know what I'm reading for the rest of my life. It's going to be Rothbard and Austrian and all those kind of schools of thought. Like, you just get sucked in. Like, this is it. This is, yeah.
Yep. Do you think that Rothbard makes many pacifists?
No.
Have you ever heard that story before? Well, seriously, I'm listening to his his Conceived in Liberty series, which is the history of the United States. Yeah. And he gets to the chapter on the Pilgrims, and I'm listening. I'm like, oh, I know a lot about this. I've heard about the Pilgrims my whole life. And he starts talking about them. He starts talking about the Quakers, and the Quakers said crazy things. Like, they said, you can have a personal relationship with God, like personally, like not just through sitting in a service at a church. And the pilgrims freaked out. Then then women started having Bible studies outside of the church, and they started freaking out. They started calling them witches. They stripped these women like topless, like ripped their tops off and tied them to the back of carts and paraded them through the town to what's the word, to shame them, and then if you kept doing it, they would throw you out in the wilderness with the Indians that they'd been slaughtering and murdering, so then you would be killed by the angry Indians. And that was their response. It was just nuts. And of course they also hung at least one Quaker, and as I was reading that, I was going, these are the right ones. I was going, the pilgrims are the wrong ones here. You've always heard the arguments about like what they did to the American natives, and that makes sense. Everyone agrees. You're like, well, yeah, you shouldn't like slaughter people just for existing. you don't own the land. But I hadn't heard it in relation to the Quakers before. That was new to me. And as I was listening to them, as I was listening to the Protestants, or the Protestant pilgrims on one side, and the Quakers on the other, and I was literally surrounded by Puritan prayers and books about the Puritans, because I'd gone through a big reformed stage where I was like, I'm reformed now, and then was all into that stuff. And I'm looking at all these books that I have, and I'm like, I thought those were the good guys. But then as I'm reading this, I stopped and I prayed and just said, Lord, don't ever let me be those people, like the Pilgrims versus the Quakers. Let me never be the one who's persecuting the person who's just freaking trying to be like you. And I got rid of those books because they made me sick at that point. And I said, I all of a sudden at that point, when I went to church, I noticed in the prayer where the pastor said, for the first time, I noticed where he said, and Lord, bless our brave men and women overseas as they're fighting for what's right. Please keep them safe and bless their work in Jesus. And I'm hearing this, and suddenly my spirit that was cheering goes, and I go, oh, and I couldn't shake it. And within a year, I left pretty much the evangelical church. Well, yeah, I left. I was sitting at home, not having any church attending. And I said, okay, I'm so impressed by the Quakers. So I'm going to definitely look into what it'd be like to be a Quaker. And then I was like, and what are those other people in history? Those other ones who were like the Quakers, who the Catholic Church and the Protestants were killing back in the Middle Ages. The Anabaptists. So I started reading nonstop about the Quakers and the Anabaptists and what they went through. They're similar. I mean, the Quakers are a descendants of the Anabaptists, that same movement, but it all started with the Anabaptists. And the Anabaptists, they said, we want to live like Jesus. We don't want to fight in the Catholic Church's wars, and we don't want to do all these other things. I mean, it was revolutionary. And the Catholic Church said, excuse me, no, you can't opt out. That's just not the way it is. So then they fled to the Protestants, and then Zwingli started drowning them. So the Catholic Church is burning them at the stake. Freaking Zwingli's murdering them. And it was a disaster, man.
Yeah. No, the whole Catholics in war is so weird, because Catholics, we hold up the church fathers a lot. Like, we're very big, like the church fathers are go-to guys. All of them refuse to fight, and they all chose to die at the end of the day. Almost all of them. I mean, yes. My favorite, one of my favorite saints of all time. I can't remember his name. He's a patron saint of comedians. He found the Romans were going to come and take all the church's money, so he gave it all to the poor. And it was like, you can't rob me, you gotta rob them. Then they threw him on hot coals and said, repent of your face and you can live. And he said, I'm done on this side, turn me over. Like, this dude was like, he was savage. He was mocking them right past, like, not fighting, accepting his fate, and still mocking them. Like, that was amazing to me. And no, the Quakers, I love the Quakers. Like, the Quakers are so unique to me, because they're like very traditional, but at the same time very progressive. They're like, we're making our Bible studies, and slavery is bad, but also we're not going to fight any war, and we're going to have the Bible, and we're going to be traditional and not have a lot of music. Like it's like they were. The best I have, they were radical, progressive traditionalists. Like they were like a little bit of everything, and I absolutely adore the Quakers. You ever see the movie Friendly Persuasions?
Oh, I love Friendly Persuasion. It is one of my favorites.
Same!
I learned, especially after I became a pacifist, that movie opened up to me and I got it. I went,
Yeah.
That's my favorite. That might be my favorite movie of all time.
It's for me, it's in my top 3. It's a phenomenal film. Anyone here that's seen it, go watch it.
Powerful on so many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's I'm probably gonna watch it tomorrow now because it's such a great movie. No, I host a Libertarian movie club along with the book club and the podcast. So I got to get you on for the movie club to talk about like Friendly Persuasions. Like we do like an hour-long podcast on just that movie because that would be a lot of fun.
I'm a big fan of Gary Cooper, man. He was a good man. Like it is. I was just reading about him a few days ago. Would highly recommend anybody read about him. Read about what he did during the making of High Noon and how he defended a guy accused of being a communist. It'll blow your mind. It is. That's a good man.
No movies back then and actors back then were a different breed of people. Like some of these people back in the old movies and old actors, I'm like, those movies are phenomenal. And some of these old actors, you read stories, you're just like, oh wow, he was a good dude. You read about actors nowadays, you're just like, I don't want you anywhere near my state. I want you to anywhere near my people. You stay away. But these old actors, they were. Well, we've gone for almost 50 minutes. Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up with a few more top themes in pacifism, obviously. I forgot to actually no. Let's back it up because I forgot to ask a question earlier. You were explaining your ideological history. Did the passive you were reading like Rothbard? When you were reading Rothbard and found out about the Quakers and kind of like jumped to pacifism from there? Were you already calling yourself? Were you already like in the ANCAP person, or were you sort of reading the history side of the of Rothbard's work?
Yeah, by that time, I'd been studying Rothbard for around 3 years, and I was, pretty. I was, pretty much at that point there. I've been listening to a lot of actually their Mises has their free classes, so I listened to all of the Tom Woods sessions, and I just fell in love with him. His book Meltdown in 2007, man, so good.
Tom Woods is my favorite public intellectual / historian. Like if anyone says like, hey, who's a good guy to read? Like Tom Woods, guy to listen to. Tom Woods. Like anyone says anything, like Tom Woods. Go to Tom Woods for everything.
Yeah, he's not only a good guy to read, he's just a good guy, and he's just across the board reasonable, just really neat person. I listened to who were the others? Like some from Ralph Rako and all the dudes, and then Hans Hermann Hoppe, where he talked about feudalism as the most likely outcome, like the most likely world we live in an ANCAP society, which is not what most ANCAPs imagine. They just imagine life just the way it is now, except without government. Highly unlikely, man. Highly unlikely.
I'm talking to the post-libertarians lately and having them on a podcast. And so we'll kind of talk about post-libertarianism, the Hoppian covenant side communities. I got do you know what Popular Liberty is? Have you heard of him?
No. Is that a podcast?
Yeah, he's a podcast guy on Twitter. Really, really smart dude. He's developed a whole new framework for looking at governments called I can't pronounce it, tropism, where he combines history, science, and laws of thermodynamics to explain how governments operate. Really incredible dude. He's coming on to talk about Hoppian covenant style communities in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about Judges and Leviticus. It is going to be an absolute blast. And my favorite book in the Bible is Judges. Like I love, and Gideon is my favorite Bible character.
That is a fascinating book. Because one of the coolest things about that book, man, is people point to that as God's judgment. They're like, well, look at this. They did all this horrible stuff in Israel, and then God judged them. God sent them to get their behind spanked and whatever. But what you learn actually from that book, if you look at it carefully, you'll realize that God's judgment was actually getting out of the way and allowing them to receive the natural consequences of their own actions.
Yes.
Because Israel is falling apart at the seams, just crumbling in Judges. And God steps in, intervenes specially to help them, when they call out to him. And then when they just go completely nuts, God lets them receive the obvious consequences of their own actions. And that's it's so clear in that book. But when you really think about it, the entire Bible is that. God's judgment isn't God saying, damn you. Okay. God's judgment is God stepping back and saying,
now the war's gonna have you.
if this is what you want, then so be it. And he lets us receive what we deserve. Like that is what God's judgment is. Oh, but yeah, the book of Judges, that's a powerful book on so many levels. He
probably brought up this point that made me blew my mind. It's like we viewed, like you said, Judges as God's judgment being cast on, but really, if you look at it from the naturalistic history standpoint, they were falling into degenerate behaviors, and that made them weak and made them white prey for the targets around them. It's like
exactly, man.
It's gonna be. I'm so excited for this. Sadly, it's the last one of the month, September 30th. I got like a month of waiting for that podcast, but I cannot wait. It's gonna be so exciting. Oh,
very cool.
Well, we've gone for a good amount of time. I gotta have you back on again to talk about friendly persuasions, and you've been a great guest. Go ahead and plug your stuff and let people know where they can follow you and find you at, and get out of here.
Yeah, well, first let me point out, you've referred to me as an ANCAP many times throughout this episode. And while, yes, I hold to anarcho-capitalism, I consider myself an agorist. That's what I call myself. I'm TechnoAgorist. That's my podcast. That's my name my handle on Twitter. So yeah, I'm an agorist. ANCAPs, they have no way forward, but Samuel Conca III, he pointed that out. He said, ANCAP, like the ends are the same. The agorist shares the same end goals as the ANCAPs. The thing is, the ANCAPs don't have a way forward. And that's where agorism says, well, what we do is we create alternate markets and we live free now in preparation for the day when there is no government, so that when the government collapses, when the shit hits the fan, when whatever happens, we're already living, we're already doing, we already have everything in place. So it's living free now, not waiting for some hopeful future.
I'm having Jose Galison on from No Way Jose. He's gonna come on and explain agorism like I'm 5. I'm starting a new podcast series called "Explain Me Like I'm 5," where people explain topics. Like I got Stefan Kinsella coming on to explain intellectual properties like I'm a 5-year-old. It's gonna be it's gonna be a fun series because people get too scared to ask the dumb questions, and I'm dumb enough to ask the dumb questions. So it's gonna be
it's a good way to be, man.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Jesus said. Yeah, be like one of these kids.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I'm Ryan. I'm a TechnoAgorist online. That's the best place to find me. You can find my podcast, TechnoAgorist.com. I hope to start recording again soon. It's been a big year of transition. Left Pennsylvania, moved down to Florida, didn't have internet. Now we're living in the middle of a big national forest. Yeah, are you in Florida?
I am. Born and raised. I stay in the Union.
Yeah, well, we're now in the middle of the Ocala National Forest. So you step off our property and you're in the National Forest, man. We're building our little agorist compound right here.
Awesome.
But yeah, so yeah, that's me. Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun. Well, everybody, another episode of the Catholic Libertarian podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. I forgot to ask. I normally ask my guests to recommend 2 books. And so if you recommend any 2 books, yeah. And I normally text them in advance to let them know for what 2 books you get. This question's coming up, and I forgot to text you. Now I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, it might be redundant to recommend. It might be redundant to bring this up after what you've talked about, but Democracy of the God That Failed. I decided to get myself a print copy of that, so that's coming in. So I can't wait to, seriously, I've been buying up books as fast as I can, because if this last year's taught us anything, it's that information is never safe unless you physically have it yourself. Seriously, man. So I'm trying to get all the best books. So that's a huge one, obviously. And then Another book I've been reading, which has been a big blessing to me, and I know a lot of people will have their own ideas, but I loved the title, so I bought it. Peaceful on Purpose. And the whole idea is this is about, like finding your center in your identity as a Christian, rather than letting your okayness or your in life be defined by your circumstances. Because you can't, like, it's just like agorism, man. You can't control the circumstances within which you live. So you focus on the things you can control, like Harry Brown, in his wonderful book. But seriously, yeah, I've been enjoying that book. So say what you want about Joel Osteen, but I saw the title and I buy almost anything I can find that says peace, because I like to be the peace guy. I'm like, okay, if you're gonna give a title like that, I'll do it. And that book, it's good, man, because we can't control our circumstances. The only thing we can do is rely on the promises that we have from God, and do what we live the way, control what we can in life, and don't have our okayness be dependent on the circumstances around us that we can't control. That's stupid and unhelpful.
Absolutely, I agree. Everyone it's very stoic, very much in the stoic sense. And I think there's once in a while I'm against stoicism because it's very apoplectic to life around you. There is an avenue where what's accepting situations and making the best of them is helpful for a lot of people. And I think it's taken too far, you become apoplectic and just accept things and don't try to change them. But accepting things you can't change is a very important part of being happy and not being stressed out of your mind about everything. Well, that's been another episode of the Catholic Libertarian. Hope everyone had a great time. Go follow and check out my guests, Ryan. Everyone have a good night. I'll see you next time.